Okay, we are recording. All right, so welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to discuss Judaism. There's a couple things I wanted to do first. Jerry, if I could put you on the spot. You mentioned in the email about, do you remember about belief versus practice in talking about your mom?
Yeah.
Whoops, sorry, not to mention names. Uh, but I really liked that thought and was wondering if you could briefly just expand on it, what you meant by it, because I think because it really makes sense. And I'm when I'm trying to make sense of the Jewish religion,
Mhm.
belief versus practice. So
Yeah. My mother's 89 and she's in good health. She's Sicilian, so she's got that fountain of youth thing going on.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people think she's my sister rather than my mother. Um, but we were all raised Catholics,
Yeah.
and she's not been a very devout Catholic in any way. She goes to the church at weddings and funerals, basically. But now that she's getting on and almost 90, she's all of a sudden got interested in religion. And thanks to you guys, we've had these fun, entertaining, and enlightening exposure to these different traditions that we've been doing at this group. And that video that you showed us last time about Jewish mysticism really struck me as being particularly wonderful. And it was just so positive, because I think we often look at conventional wisdom in all the negative terms, and I know I do. Being a theosophical student, I want the real stuff. And so it's hard to ignore the clutter that you see. But what my mother's trying to do is figure out what to believe. And I noticed that, for a lot of people, that maybe from our part of the world, their religious experience revolves around like what your belief system is. And that it kind of, that's where the limit. I mean, there may be some prayers you do and some things like that, but it isn't really a practice. It isn't a set of behaviors or disciplines. How about that? Disciplines that are part of your tradition that is the main concern. I think that's true in the United States. I don't know elsewhere in the world. I couldn't speak for that. But my mother kind of wants to know what to believe. And I keep wondering to myself, shouldn't she be more concerned with what it is I should be practicing? So that was the general gist of the thought.
yeah, I wonder if it's like a generational thing in the sense that because I see the same in my mom, just tell me what to believe in.
Right.
And
And then it'll be fine.
yeah. And I think too, I feel like we've lost, or there's a gap or a space now between practice and belief system that at least I see in Zoroastrianism, and as I'm seeing now, these are very ritually based
Yep.
religions. And so those rituals kind of give you an idea what to believe, or give you a way to believe, to bring it in. And I think to bring it into everyday life. And I think we've lost some of that ability, maybe. Any other thoughts?
I think in Christianity, there is a historical reason for that. Like, because Christianity, when basically Saint Paul was trying to expand Christianity out of just a Jewish sect into something more universal, then the question of, okay, what makes you a Christian would come up, because what makes you a Jewish person? Well, you are born Jewish. So how can these non-Jewish people be Christians? What makes you that? And Paul said that what makes you a Christian basically is faith. You are made right by faith. Uh, and I think that stuck with Christianity. And then, even though there is morality in Christianity and all of that, the idea that it is faith that makes you a Christian and that will save you, etc., stuck there.
Well, there's also the feeling of loving your brothers and sisters as a community of loving and caring and giving, regardless of what the rituals would be. It's always part of a community in a Christian religion is associating with your brother and caring for the community and the parish. But in the Catholic thing, I know my family, they like the celebrations and the ritual, but they don't really understand or really get really deeply into the Catholicism and the sense of the wonderful church teachings by the fathers and the saints and the wonderful literature that's come out of it. They're not into that. They have the St. Joseph's Day or whatever day, and they occasionally go to church. And my God, if you go to another church, you're really committing a sin. You know, it's a terrible thing. There's this faith and oath to this belief that it's the only true faith, and that they carry on with that, and they lose a lot of understanding of Christianity through that because they're not really associated with their brothers and sisters in that effect. But I mean, that seems to be their thing. I think with Protestantism, there was more of an understanding of the literature, the Bible. They studied that much more closely, the teachings of Christ. So there's this sort of a difference between the two factions, the Catholics. The Catholics ruled by the elders and the popes and this and that, and there's not much thinking that goes on with the folks. But with the Protestants, there's more engagement. So there's an exploration more of the word. So, but I think the older generation is probably more involved. As you say, the younger generation, they're not interested in rituals. And I think they're just interested in communicating with each other in little communities, little groups of people getting together.
Okay.
So that's how it's kind of separated the churches in a way.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Joyce. So was there any other comments? Otherwise, what I wanted to do tonight was, for some reason, I was really confused by reading this one chapter. And then when I got to the end, I was looking at the questions that Robert wrote, and those were kind of the questions that I had. But I wanted to go back. I noticed that maybe we could go back to the previous chapter where it talks about the Hebrew scriptures and just go through that kind of quickly. And then we can jump into the chapter on Judaism. Okay. So I am just going to give my notes. If anybody else has read this and wants to speak up, please do at any time. Okay, so he starts this chapter out with the Hebrew scriptures, and the Hebrew scriptures, called the Old Testament by Christians, are like no other sacred book or collection of books in the world. They contain history, law, ritual, poetry, philosophy, and the special genre of prophetic books. They concern with God's dealings with humanity. All the profound issues they raise of hope and despair, love and death, right and wrong, must generally be worked out in this world and in this life, or in future generations on earth. Okay. Does anybody have any additions to that? Okay. So then the history of of a people and their God. So it talks about Genesis and the creation, Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood, and the patriarchs. Theirs was, in other words, a relation to God defined by linear time developing in the context of human history. Now, this question of time comes up a lot in the next chapter when they talk specifically about Judaism. So I'd like to keep that in mind because that was a big question for me in one of Robert's questions, what they mean by time. The main theme is for these people is their relationship with Yahweh. And not only, that they weren't just, I know a lot of times in like a little snippet, they were the chosen ones, but in their teachings or in their learnings, the chosen one comes with a lot of responsibility, kind of like Spider-Man. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So they talk about the historical part. They talk a lot about a lot of low points and then high points. So it's this ebb and flow, and which gives them their hope. And I think what keeps them connected, as we talked about last week. Okay. And then the prophets, one of the things that I found interesting in this section was, but the word prophet really means forth-teller rather than foreteller. And the great concern of those ancient seers was, in the jargon of the 60s, to tell it like it is. So it wasn't so much like a prophetic knowledge, but more they were or as I see it, and please share any ideas that you have, but these prophets were ones to tell it as it is, to tell this is what happened, this is the pattern that there is, this is how we as a people deal with it. That's how I saw it. Okay. In a nutshell. So this is a chapter in a nutshell. Okay.
Jill, I have a comment to make.
Yes, please.
On this, because I know in the Christian and the Jewish tradition, this prophet concept is really, really important. And I probably should put this in the form of a question. I wonder if the idea of the prophet has a parallel with the idea of the sage, the Mahatma in the East, and that somehow or another it's been modified or changed to mean something a little bit different, but that, originally the idea of the wise men that visited Jesus and basically the idea of prophets. I wonder, do you think that those individuals were quote unquote wise men, enlightened men and women, and that over time prophet came to mean just nothing other than being able to predict the future, and not necessarily that that individual was a highly ethical person, a highly wise and knowledgeable person?
I think, and then I'll open it up. I think we can see that cycle or that pattern in everywhere these days, going from a wise one, with the knowledge of the past. And I would say, I guess, if you have a true knowledge of the past, you can predict the future per se. So that maybe that's where the prophets of the future telling, prophets of today, or the foretelling are. So does anybody else have any comments?
Yeah, and probably, as Jerry says, these were wise people that some of them may have been able to see in the future,
Right.
To some extent. But then the emphasis was placed on their ability to see the future as opposed to, their spiritual development and wisdom.
Right. I have a note here that prophets telling of disasters if evils go unchecked. So, this is what's this is what's happened in the past. This is what could happen if we don't check what's going on. Okay.
Michelle, wouldn't you agree that one of the aims, amongst others, of the Theosophical movement itself is to restore the idea of the Mahatma and wise beings? And it does seem, and again, I'm not a scholar on these topics, I just have a casual acquaintance with it, but it doesn't seem like the idea of the sage and the wise man, it seems like it kind of fell apart in the West. It needed resuscitation. And I wondered if the Theosophical movement, one of its aims was to try and, because I know, I'll just give you a quick example. I remember in a casual conversation with someone, like in my tennis league, for example, who somehow or another we fell into philosophical conversation, and I mentioned the idea of wise men and people who were really knew, understood life. And he violently disagreed with me and said, no, there couldn't be such people. Otherwise, the world would be a better place.
Well,
There's no way there could be wise men, because otherwise they wouldn't let us get into this mess that we're in. So do you think that's true, that that's a big part of the theosophical movement, is to restore this idea of perfectibility of human beings?
Yeah, what does other people think? What do
I
you?
was just thinking that
Yeah, sounds good.
I was just thinking that the past right now is not important to folks. The history, it doesn't seem to be important to know much about the past. We have dropped it in the schools, and so there's no understanding of what happened. And then when you in the past, and then that repeats itself. So the world could be in a terrible place right now because it hasn't learned from the past. It doesn't want to know about it. So that's what I'm seeing in our situation right now in prophecy, because the prophecy comes from what you experienced and the tendencies that those experiences create. And that gives you what's going to happen. You can kind of say, this is going to happen, this and this happened. Looks like we're going in the same direction again. So that's sort of like a prophecy in a way. But that in our society right now is lacking.
Yeah, but it's in we don't have that idea of what an enlightened being is in the West. Maybe we have the idea of a saint, to some extent, but yeah, I think that Theosophy shows that far more clearer,
That
that
connection.
ideal. Yeah.
And enlightenment is just that, pretty much. An enlightened person has a seer in the sense it sees both all. It's really a lifting and understanding. And the theosophical.
Michelle,
That,
Michelle,
Yes.
can I comment?
Yes, go ahead, Jim.
I disagree with Jerry, because the Muhammad said that people who had wrong ideas about them were actually impeding their work. The Muhammads, they didn't want to be in the forefront. They themselves say what's needed is a true brotherhood of humanity, not a belief in the masters.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, perhaps I think what we see in Blavatsky, not necessarily, what you say is true, not necessarily a focus on the Muhammads, but on the idea of perfectibility, as Jerry said, the idea that there is a path to attain perfection, where this is a possibility for a human being. I think that's more what Jerry was referring to.
Okay, yeah.
Is that right, Jerry?
Absolutely, because I think that the whole Catholic trip, if you want to put it that way, was to say that the only person that is perfectible is Jesus. And all the rest of us are just weak sinners, and we need the church to make sure we get to heaven. And the whole pathway to perfectibility or to enlightenment is not available to us except through the Pope.
You're talking about the exterior church, but in the interior church, and where the monasteries and those who are really deeply into meditation and prayer and getting into it, that's the whole focus, is becoming the Christ, that we're all becoming the Christ. The exterior Catholic Church is nowhere near it, no near the truth of the study or the understanding of how we.
Yeah, and that's where you get the distinction between the mystical side of a religion and the conventional side.
No, these are very highly educated people who are delving into this. These are the Jesuits, and these are the teachers, and they're constantly working on the inner life and the outer life and integrating it. But they have the understanding, of course, that we're all Christs. If you read any of those folks, and so there's a real separation from the exterior churches and the real true teachings of the Catholic Church, the old church fathers from ancient past.
Okay, so to go along with that, what came to my mind is what Annie Besant says about Theosophy, or one of its ideas or aims, as you say, Jerry, is that to teach people or to show people how to live their current religion. And I think by studying what isn't necessarily out there, very easy to find, is these ancient teachings, which then puts emphasis on these perfected beings. So I think You know, that is a more like vocal or a more common part to help people to live their religion, and thereby learning that there are these perfected beings. So let me finish up here. Yet the prophets were no mere political pundits. They were persons of deep faith who believed God had called them and was speaking through them. Okay.
I think this is an important point, and I actually agree with Jerry that there's a good possibility that the Theosophical movement came to be in order um, uh, to make a distinction between mediumship and an enlightened seer, which I think is very important. It also, I think, what has been brought through about the Mahatmas and their students, their chelas, is the uniqueness of that relationship, and how interesting it is, and what a difficult relationship it is to be there for students. So, and also it suggests the limitations of their ability to intervene. They know a lot about cause and effect, but there's not much they can do in certain situations, except, as they say, we hope.
Thank you. Any other comments before I go on? Okay. Okay, so under wisdom literature, they talk about the Hebrew scriptures. The Proverbs is a collection of sayings about life. The Song of Songs is a minority report, minority report or a love poem. Okay, then down here, and I'll just say the three things that here, that understanding the Hebrew scriptures, Robert tells us we need to understand the historic, the symbolic, and the mystical, and how those are different. And I know Annie Besant breaks those down in her book, Esoteric Christianity. So then I'll just read this last part and we can move on if there with any other comments first. In its breadth and depth, the theosophical worldview offers still more possibilities for understanding the Hebrew scriptures. First of all, the idea of a divine plan running like a golden thread through the ancient history of Israel suggests the theosophical idea of a universal divine plan for evolution of the earth. Second, the theosophical idea of many planes and universes may hint that some parts of this history, while not literally historical or physical on this globe, may reflect events we cannot fully comprehend otherwise on the astral plane or even in parallel worlds. On the other hand, some theosophical writers on scripture, like C.W. Leadbeater and Jeffrey Hodson, have developed their own version of allegorical or metaphorical reading. For example, Hodson, in his classic The Hidden Wisdom in the Holy Bible, tells us that the crossing of the Red Sea represents the evolution of consciousness through and out of the realm of matter under the guidance of an adept, Moses in this case. In the end, the Hebrew scriptures, more mysterious every time one looks at them, are simply there, open to an almost endless spectrum of reactions, feelings, and ways of understanding. Perhaps that is why what they are intended to provoke. Okay, any comments, questions, insights, inspirations? Okay. All right, so with that, we start with Judaism. All right. I saw, and I don't know if it was here, the word covenant was brought up a lot, and I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. So the dictionary, a formal, solemn, binding agreement, that helped me get through this. So we have.
That refers because a central theme in Judaism is the covenant between Israel and God, let's say Yahweh. The idea that if his chosen people remain, what do you say? They
Truthful.
truthful, etc., that God will help them and protect them. So that's the covenant, as I understand it. I don't know the actual Jewish people here, if there is a more nuanced understanding of that or not.
Okay. Okay. So this first part just gives some general things. Does anybody have any notes that they took on this first part? That Robert's question is special roles the Jews have in history. Did anybody find any inspiration in this first part? I don't want to read it because we don't have as much time as to read the whole chapter.
Maybe continuity would be a special role, because really as far as being the chosen people, it wasn't that they were special, it was that they were the only ones that were willing to accept the covenant with God. Others apparently were approached and no one else wanted to do it. And I don't know if this has become a joke in the Jewish community, but that's the feeling, that it wasn't that there was something special about these people. It was that they accepted the covenant, which is, for lack of a better word, like a contract.
Well, they had a specially close relationship that developed through that with God, in the sense that they had developed a sort of a personal relationship, in a sense, as a nation. They had that.
Right.
Monolithically, it really was the beginning of civilized world.
Mm-hmm. The one God.
Right, Adele, I think that's a really good point that you bring up. That because a lot of times in things like this, we think special means because, or chosen because you're special, not chosen because you've chosen, or because you're going to take it up. And we don't realize the dangers in it. It's not chosen, special, easy. It's usually chosen, special, and a very difficult road ahead of us.
Because
Right.
this was in the context of people that were polytheists, so they believed in a lot of gods. So yeah, what Adele says is these were the people who were willing to believe in the one God, and the others kept with their polytheistic traditions.
And also there was some progress in moral and ethical being, where these things were being debated. For instance, often it's misunderstood, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It was progressive in the sense that before that, vigilante violence was terrible. Someone would do something and their whole family would be killed. So this was to say that the law would not allow more than what was done, meaning tooth for tooth and eye for an eye. Now it's of course barbaric, because we've evolved out of that. And that is with the help of discussion and debating and questioning. One of the important things in Judaism is that the Jewish people are encouraged to question everything, including their faith.
Right, and I think too, it's not necessarily that you must get an eye for an eye, but that if you take somebody's eye out, that they can come and take yours. So I see it also as kind of a warning, like what you tell your kids when you're growing up, when they're growing up. Okay, so this next part, Jews amid ancient empires. It kind of just gives a history of the Babylonian exile, the Persian Empire, Alexander the Great, which we also know him as Alexander the Accursed, and
By the Parsis.
by the Parsis, yeah, and the Maccabee brothers, who mounted a successful campaign to drive out the oppressor. I know I read somewhere then, as it shows here, there's a century of peace after that. And then the Roman Empire came in and Pontius Pilate. And yes, so that during the difficult years, Jewish religious tradition was consolidated by distinguished rabbis. And then this next paragraph, this is the notes that I have. Jewish orthodoxy does not mean the kind of direct, unmediated adherence to the Bible claimed by Christian fundamentalists. Rather, it acknowledges both Scripture's divine inspiration and its legitimate interpretation and application by a recognized succession of rabbis, beginning with the Talmud and continuing down to today. And that's, it talks about the temple. The Jews were exiled from the temple, but it wasn't destroyed. And then I believe they got to come back. And then they were exiled again, and then it was destroyed and never rebuilt. Any other comments, questions? Jerry?
Yeah, I have a comment from kind of the line of thought we were all talking about leading into this too. I'm sure it's all connected. But it seems, I could be wrong, and I may have misread this, but it seems to me that what HPB, one of the points she makes in the Secret Doctrine about the Jewish faith and Judaism was that this monotheistic idea, the one God, was a problem, because as Pablo was saying, Judaism grew up within the context of polytheism, and so this Yahweh, this particular God, this Jehovah, that the Jews claimed as their own, and who they elevated to the position of the ultimate God, was nothing of the sort. It was part of a pantheon of gods that they selected out of a group of gods and elevated to this position. And she makes the point in a variety of places that in the metaphysics of the secret doctrine, there's a difference to be made between, you might say, the architects and the builders. And Jehovah is a regional god, a builder, if you will. And to elevate his or its status to being the God of gods or supreme God was a fundamental philosophical mistake. And that's what I remember from reading about Judaism and the secret doctrine in relation to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, she's repeating, how the scholars normally understand the development, because, as you say, what the scholars say is that historically, there were all these gods, and the early Jewish people were polytheistic, and then there was Yahweh that was one of those gods, and the covenant was, okay, I will be your God and you will worship me among many. And that as time passed, the idea grew that this was the only true God, and that all the other gods didn't exist. And that's what the scholars today say. But I think that's, from an exoteric point of view, that may have happened with people. That happens to all movements. Even Theosophy, Blavatsky said, okay, we are restating the ancient wisdom, and there may be many theosophies that today think this is the only truth, for example. So that's something that tends to happen. I I I always wonder how was the view of the true mystic people in Judaism, if they understood, the idea of Jehovah, in a deeper way, not just like the regional God that that was originally. Because if you see in the Kabbalah, how do they relate Jehovah with Ein Sof and all that in the Kabbalah? The idea of the macro prosopus, I think is pronounced, and the micro. So I think there were these two currents going together, but exoterically, scholars today agree with what HPV said too.
And it makes you wonder, when we'd heard, our friends talking about their experience with Judaism, and it helped to explain for me, at least, one thing that's been a mystery is just why there's such a strong cultural and social component to Judaism that we don't see in other religions quite the same way. That there's just been this history of persecution. I mean, severe persecution for centuries. I mean, we're not just talking about one Holocaust, we're talking about dozens of them, over many centuries. It makes me wonder if part of this persecution what does it trace from? What was the source of it? Does it have anything to do with their claims to being, the one and only special chosen? I mean, maybe that infuriated other groups and religions to the point that they were moved to persecute them as a result. I don't know, but one wonders, where does all this animosity and persecution towards the Jews come from?
I think it comes from the human nature or the human experience, in that we can see anywhere, even within the Theosophical Society. Help me here. Wasn't there HPB dismantled some group because the rest thought that they were special, like the inner group? I thought I heard.
No, but that was more because they couldn't be in harmony.
Oh.
Yeah, but the question is, there are many religions. Why were the Jewish especially targeted? I don't know how is it seen from inside. Francine or Adele, what's the idea why the Jewish were particularly targeted?
Well, we're certainly not experts. I'm sorry, Francine, to put it that way, both of us, but certainly one of the things is that they were considered the killers of Jesus. That has followed Jews throughout history.
Yeah, that is true in the Christian
Recent
era.
But we're talking about a long time.
I think Francine wanted to say
Yeah,
something.
Francine, go ahead.
I do have something to say, just thinking back from some of the earlier studies I've done in the Kabbalah, was the term trim tab was used, that the Jews as the chosen people were, as you said, would have to take on a great responsibility if they were going to move things forward in this idea of one God. And so they were like a trim tab. And I'm wondering if in that way, all the persecution, all the suffering that they've had to bear, and yet still come through whole as a people from ancient times, is evidence of their understanding and acceptance of a one God, of their, in essence, of their faith. Because as somebody said, in Christianity, what makes you a Christian is your faith. That never seemed true in Judaism, but maybe in some ways that even with all the persecution and hardships and ostracization of them and us and that kind of thing, the idea that we could still hold on to the faith that God is with us, that God is one with us.
Yeah.
as a people.
Well, there is something interesting there, perhaps because the Parsis, who were the
Right.
other group that believed in one God, in the monotheistic view, they were also isolated in India and kind of ostracized. They were lucky that they were in India, not in the Middle East, where, you know, India was always a little more philosophical. So maybe they were not so harshly persecuted. But it's interesting that the two groups that brought up this idea of monotheism were somehow, you know, shunned and isolated.
Oh,
Maybe it was just, you know, something too radically different to most of the beliefs, and we don't know what kind of interaction they had, but maybe people perceive them as these crazy people coming to try to talk about, you know, this one God. I don't
Yeah,
know.
but don't
Well,
you
they had
think
to
it
separate.
also might have to do with, just one second, Joyce. Don't you think it might also have something to do with, you had, and correct me, I know in Zoroastrianism, you have to be born into that faith. You can't
Mhm.
come in. I mean, now I know it's a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
more lax, but back then, and if the same thing were true for Judaism, that's what I meant by the human experience. I may not necessarily believe in a one God, but if I can't join your group, I want to believe in a one God, you
Yeah,
know.
there's something about that. They separate themselves because of that. They're separated. They're not, and so they not open in the sense that they protect themselves as well to the outside communities. So they sort of protect themselves in the community, and they're sort of separate in a sense because they are ostracized, and then they become very strong because they take care of themselves and with each other, and they prosper because they have this wonderful community support. So they're separate, and that's what I think causes a lot of hatred and distrust and all this, and jealousy is really a lot of it is jealousy
Mhm.
because it's a group of people who have great strength and courage and who want to do the best they can to survive. That's always known for the Hebrew group. I mean, the kids that I went to school with were they excelled so much more than we did. They had a real sense of understanding how they had a responsibility to develop themselves. So I'm just saying the community itself is separates itself. And it's not easy to get into that community. I mean, it wasn't years ago to convert to Judaism either. It's not as open as the other faiths are. Well, they have to. I guess they have to protect themselves. I think it's about protection and community because they are, in a sense, isolated in a way because they have that one in the past anyway, the one God. Now we have the Christian understanding, but there is this separateness because they're different and they support each other and they're separate in a sense. Part of the protection, a part of it because that's how they can survive.
Right. Jerry, were you going to say something else?
Something snide.
I don't know if we have time for snide, but
No, it's pretty brief. Sammy Davis, that you might have to be old enough to understand this reference. Sammy Davis managed to get into the Jewish tradition, so
right,
you wonder how hard it must be.
right.
Michelle, I just want to add one more
Yes,
thing.
yes.
Judaism was very much against idol worshiping, and in ancient world that was not an easy thing to annihilate. There was a lot of idol worshiping going on, so that was another thing
Mhm.
that sort of created, I think, some problems.
Yeah.
Right, right. Okay, I'd like to skip over the Kabbalah and Hasidism, because of time. We might study that in our members meeting, if that's okay, unless someone would like to discuss something in those couple paragraphs. We can go on here to modern Jewish life. It seems Robert tells us there are three what? Not sects.
Streams.
Thank you. Three streams. So there's the Reform Judaism, They worship in temples rather than synagogues. Their roots are in the German Enlightenment. It is liberal in attitude, oriented more to the prophets than the law, which is also the Torah, and believes the essence of Judaism does not involve following the law strictly, but in a more matter of ethics and community life. The second one was the conservative Judaism, which regards the law seriously as a guide to life, but believes its provisions can and should be adjusted to modern living. It takes the middle ground. Reconstructionist Judaism, rooted in humanism and the most radical version, holds that Judaism should be ever evolving to meet the challenges of the contemporary age. So would you say there's those three streams, and then there's also the Kabbalah, the Kabbalists, and the Hasidism, the Hasidics?
Hasidics.
Yeah, the Hasidics. So does anybody have any comments from this section or from what I just read?
Well, the more religious would be called the Orthodox, and there are many sects of Orthodoxy. So there are many groups of Orthodoxy who practice the Hasidic or the more traditional forms of Judaism. I think I liked what he said, though, about the distinction between the reform and the conservative, because I do see that in people I know who do participate in the religious services and the religious traditions. And I can see the distinction between the reform community focusing on the ethics and service to the community, and not so much on practice of the traditional laws. I can give you an example. My husband was raised in a very reform temple, and he was bar mitzvahed, which young boys at 13 become men in the tradition of Judaism. And he did not wear a kippah or a talit, which are ritual prayer shawl and head covering. He didn't even wear that at his bar mitzvah in the Reform tradition. That was not even essential, where any other group you would, they wouldn't allow you to be in the temple without your kippah or your talit. So, that the practice of those traditions wasn't as important as the service and the community in his upbringing. Where in my upbringing, we practiced and we followed the Shabbat and the ritual of lighting the candle and the practice of not doing certain things on the Sabbath, and so very distinct differences. Yeah.
But I think one of the things that unites all these aspects of Judaism, all these movements, is that service is a definite pillar of Judaism. And
Yeah.
I think all they're united in this, that part of our mission in the world is to contribute to heal the world and well, to heal the world, and that's where Tikkun Olam comes in, and that is, we have to do our part to make the world a better place.
Okay.
Mm.
So this paragraph, oh, I'm sorry. Does anybody else have anything? This next paragraph says, many religious Jews, however, would probably agree on at least 3 points: that there is a God or divine force who is creator of the universe and its underlying reality. That's one. Number 2 is that this God reveals himself within time and history. And number 3, that in this revelation, the Bible, above all the law given to Moses and the insights of the prophets, has a special place. Okay.
So was
Jerry?
the concept of Jehovah taught as a male God?
I believe yes, but there's something about in the Hebrew scriptures that there's a she. Is that wisdom?
Yeah, Shekinah probably. Well, Francine must know about this because this is dealt with in the Kabbalah quite prominently. But I don't know what do you say, Francine?
Well, yes. I mean, I think the Shekinah is ultimately the female force that is thought of as the source, but all the prayers are directed towards a male god. You know, all the religious prayers are blessed be he, blessed be he. So in at least in the conservative tradition that I grew up in. So yeah, I always had a problem with that. This sort of male god figure. Yeah.
Okay, so this last paragraph in this section covers themes, or covers the way two modern Jewish theologians developed these themes. One is the I-thou relationship to God and others, that in which the other is not simply an it to be used like an impersonal object, but a thou, full of inwardness and subjectivity like that of the I. And the other one is a Jewish thinker with a mystical bent, says Jewish practice as sanctifying the whole of nature and life. Judaism as a religion does not center itself in doctrine or metaphysical realities, but in time. That is, tradition out of the past and hope in the future. Any comments? Okay. The Jewish observances, I'm going to just name them, and then if we want to discuss any. So the cornerstone of Jewish practice is the Sabbath. This period of 24 hours from sunset Friday to sunset Saturday commemorates the Lord's day of rest after the work of creation, and it is intended for the rest and refreshment of both flesh and spirit. Traditional Sabbath observance begins with concluding one's ordinary business, bathing, and putting on fresh garments reserved for that festive day on Friday afternoon. And after sundown, the previously prepared Sabbath meal is eaten with traditional dishes and blessings. Then there are several festivals. The high holy days consist of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when according to tradition, God reckons up the sins of every person for the previous year and sets their faith accordingly for the coming year. Passover.
You can learn about that in Mrs. Maisel.
Yeah, yes. And also, I wanted to say, I'm going to butcher her name, Mayim. She is the Amy on
Bialik, Mayan Bialik.
Thank you. On Big Bang Theory, and she's Jewish, and she has a YouTube channel that she tells about each Jewish religious holiday. So I found that very entertaining and enlightening at the same time. So there's Passover, Sukkot, Purim, Hanukkah. The boys get circumcised and have bar mitzvahs, and the girls have bat or bas mitzvahs. Anybody?
That's a fairly modern thing, girls having
Right.
bat mitzvahs. It was sort of probably started more in America during
Right.
modern times.
Okay. Then they talk about the Jewish diet. Dietary laws have played an immense role throughout the centuries in keeping the faith alive and its people together. No restrictions govern food from plants. The law deals only with killing and eating sentient life. The basic rules are that animals eaten must have a split hoof and chew the cud. This includes cattle and sheep, but excludes swine, reptiles, horses, carnivores, and most species. Of sea creatures, only those with fins and scales may be eaten. Of aerial creature, birds of prey and insects are forbidden. Furthermore, meat must be slaughtered and prepared in special ways to be kosher or edible by those keeping the rules. The rules also forbid the eating of meat and dairy products together and expect that separate pots and plates will be used for each.
Michelle,
Yes.
there's something important here that isn't mentioned. The idea of a meal of meat being kosher is that the animal being slaughtered is not to feel any pain. And that is part of what makes it kosher, that the blade is supposed to be sharp and it's supposed to be done in such a way that the animal doesn't suffer, doesn't have fear. Whether we agree with that or not, is it possible for the animal really not to feel the suffering or the pain or the fear when, especially during industrial times? But that was the idea about kosher, and the reason you don't mix the meat with the milk is that you're not supposed to bathe the calf in the milk of its mother. So
Okay.
okay, so
And also, part of the way you have to get rid of all the blood, isn't that true?
Yes.
yes, the
And I
draining.
think that's quite esoteric too, because HPV says that one of the main problems in eating meat is in the blood, because the blood is a vehicle of karma. So when you are eating meat that has blood, then the effect on you is worse than if you eat meat without blood. So that's quite interesting.
Francine, would you agree that anyone who observes kosher laws, kasherut, that they would never eat a piece of steak or beef that still is a little bit bloody? It's always,
Yes,
yeah,
I think that's
yeah,
true. I
right.
mean, that is what koshering means to when you koshering a meat or poultry is to draw out the blood. You do that with salt. That's what the use of kosher salt is. So the salt draws out the blood, and so it has to be salted for a period of time to draw out the blood before it is considered koshered.
And any animal that is a scavenger, including, lobsters and crabs, any kosher doesn't include scavengers.
Right.
So,
Like catfish, even though it's a fish, it's
Right.
still a scavenger. Right.
right.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so then, and obviously today's observance of dietary rules varies immensely. We don't need to go into that because we know talking about people's diets is a very touchy subject. Judaism has the highest regard for marriage and family. Ideally, Jewish life revolves around the home even more than the synagogue. Centered in family and community, it is a tradition highly conscious of living in the context of a long history and of having a special mission in the world. And then this last paragraph. Judaism and Theosophy. Theosophy has sometimes been accused of being associated with anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism, but this seems grossly unjust. In fact, HPB paid Judaism the tribute of considering the Kabbalah, its great mystical system, to be a supreme vehicle of the ancient wisdom, a recognition accorded no Christian philosophy except Gnosticism. H.S. Olcott, in his old diary leaves, mentioned a learned Jew who had studied the Kabbalah for 30 years. After discussing its lore with Blavatsky, he said that in all this time, his researches had not discovered the true meanings that she read into certain texts and that illumined them with a holy light. Moreover, in Isis Unveiled, Blavatsky praises the Jews' unity despite differences of opinion and notes how faithfully and nobly they have stood by their ancestral faith under the most diabolical persecutions. If she sometimes attributes Judaism to even more ancient sources than the scriptures and criticizes superficial readings of that faith, she does no more than many Jewish and other scholars and Kabbalists, past and present. Judaism remains a significant conveyor of the ancient wisdom and a mediator between East and West.
Yeah, with HPV, there is a problem that because HPV criticized everything, you know, where she saw either superficial understandings or attempts at dominating. So she criticized the Christians a lot. She criticized the Swamis and their exclusivism. She criticized aspect of Judaism. But then people from the different religions, they feel that, you know, HPV targeted them. She criticized scientists and even theosophies. Many times she spoke, you know, very disparagingly about theosophies. And so that has to always be kept in context. You know, it's not that she targeted one particular religion or group.
Right. Okay. Oh, Jerry, I love that I know when you're going to speak.
Yeah, that's kind of handy, huh?
It is.
No, I was just going to add to what Pablo was saying, is that she was critical of untruth, wherever it was. And I think he's absolutely right when Pablo says everybody felt persecuted.
She was much harsher on Christianity than she was on Judaism.
Yeah.
Right, right. Pablo Maniti?
I want to say something from Golda Meir. Maybe he say a joke, like Moses took the Jews to a desert without oil.
Right, right. Definitely not Saudi Arabia, huh?
But just for a second, and very, very interesting. Maybe I'm going to read the history to find out, because it's for centuries and centuries, the Jews were persecuted. And finally, when they have a state of their own, they had to fight all the time and for a piece of land, and created that conflict with the Palestine, which is still there. There's no solution for that.
Yeah, that's a difficult subject to try and broach.
Well, but at the same time, it's part of the history. I think it's part of that struggle. That
Right.
finally you have a state, but there is no peace. And I remember one time when I work in New York, there are many Jewish people. And one of my friends, one day he said, Pablo, I want to come back to Israel. And I said, but there are too many problems. There is war all the time. And he said, don't affect me. We born with war. We born fight. There is no problem.
Right.
Yeah, but this is not really like a Jewish problem or a Palestinian problem. You have that problem whenever a country is established, and you know these are new countries. You have the same problem in India, between Pakistan and India. When you draw a border here in the US, all the wars were with Mexico until one prevails. You know, all this part of California was Mexico, and you can say the US bullied Mexico and took this land. So that's a human problem. Whenever you draw a new country, you know, the borders are always a problem.
What about the Native Americans?
Yeah.
Yeah, very.
Yeah, there you have.
And the problem is solved by one being effectively, you know, able to bully the other into submission. I don't know that we have solve that problem diplomatically in the past. Maybe, in this case, we will eventually get to some diplomatic solution. But in the past, it was always through war. And in South America, we had a lot of wars in all the borders with the other countries in the north of Argentina too. And, whoever wins gets the border.
And we have the expression that history is written by the victors.
Yeah.
We had the problem with the South too, the war with the South that we're still fighting. So that was a major separation.
Okay, do we have any takeaways? Anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak, tell us what I always ask this. I have a group with my family, and I always ask, what's your takeaway, or how is tonight's discussion going to affect you tomorrow, or what tomorrow are you going to do with the information that you learned today?
That's the school teacher in you, Michelle.
No? Well, I want to make sure everybody heard something. Okay. No?
I think we are better today. Already we are better.
All right. All right. Well, we have kept everybody past 8. So, yeah, we're next week.
If you need overtime, it's okay with me.
Okay, thank you, Pablo. Thank you. So next week, what we'll probably do is I put an email out to a rabbi here in Ojai, and I'm hoping to hear back from her, and we can have a discussion with her here. Otherwise, Maria had suggested an article that she has that we can discuss together, read and discuss. Or I thought if I can find something other than a 40-page chapter on the Kabbalah, we can do a little reading up on the Kabbalah.
Yeah, we tried to contact the TS in Israel.
Yes.
You tried to contact. What
Yeah,
happened with them?
I just didn't hear from them. So yeah, because that was such a nice connection we had with the TS in Mumbai that I thought maybe we could do it again. But we'll see.
I believe Tim Boyd is in touch with the Israeli TS.
Oh, we are too.
Yeah, we are friends of a couple of them, and we email, frequently, but they couldn't get
so
organized.
Crazy busy. Yeah, everybody's so crazy busy, and the time it's 5 a.m. there when we're having our meeting. Yeah. So that's not.
Could we have access to the article that Maria was suggesting we read? It won't detract from anything. We'll just be a little bit more informed.
Oh, of course.
Whatever we do.
Of course. Yep. All right. So, shalom.
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 Thank you. Right. Good job, Michelle. Thank you.
Right. Okay, you guys, everybody have a good night. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
See y'all next week.
Stay safe.
Yes.